Ladies and gentlemen, I want to congratulate this great initiative that has now completed the first 10 years of its existence, and I wish Vidhi to be Shatayu. 90 years more till all of us in this country learn to follow the constitution. It's a great initiative, and it's inspiring to see that you're doing this work. Thank you for asking me to come and speak here. Law is not my subject, but the Indian society is. And therefore I have decided to speak about some laws and regulations which have had impact on our society, both culturally and in terms of livelihoods. We all know that our society has been divided traditionally in terms of varna, jati, sects, even in terms of religions, language, and so on. We know the origin of varna, which goes to the Gandhara period, post-Harappan, prehistoric times. We understand why that distribution happened. One did not justify it. I do not justify it. But we at least know why it happened. We know about the emergence of jati, the historic period when jati got consolidated. We know about the period of emergence of different languages and linguistic differences. We know that from the 8th century onwards in the south and 11th century onwards in northern and western part of India, new sects emerged, and around that social groups got mobilized belonging to this sect or that sect. We all know this. But neither varna was created by any law of those times, nor was jati created by law, nor were languages created by law, nor were the sects created by law. But a new social category did get created by enactment of law. I want to speak about that specific category. Today, in 2023, as I speak to you, I recall that it is the centenary of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar's PhD dissertation called The Question of Indian Unity. And some of you who read that know that his argument was, when he was facing that problem about unequal currency, different weights of coins in different Indian states, and the British government was not able to resolve that some coins weighed maybe 6.1 grams, other coins weighed 5.9 grams, but they had equal value. How to rectify this was a problem, and the British were trying to link that either with the gold standard or the silver standard. But Ambedkar, the young research student, wrote that if he had his way, he would simply melt all the coins and issue currency notes. He was not defending currency notes. He was saying that unless all coins are of the same weight, no currency has authenticity. I recall this because law should actually move towards creating classless, casteless, varnaless society. But in its place, if it does something quite opposite, that's very shocking. My mind goes back to the 1830s. This was a time when the East India Company was ruling, not the British, official British rule. It was the company rule. And Indian princes were defeated, the many soldiers of the defeated princes were footloose going around, and some of them had arms. And it was the mission of the British in the 1820s, because the last battle was 1818 between Peshwas and the British. In the 1820s, the British made it their mission to disarm these soldiers. To disarm India became a kind of, much later, after Macaulay, the mission changed, and they said to civilize India we're here. But 20 years before that, they were there to disarm India. As a consequence of that desire, they passed a law called the Thugee Act. Now the word Thugee was not name of any community in India. The word Thug was not name of any Indian community. That word was also not in the traditional English language. It was a kind of a spoken English in small groups. That word was picked up, and the Thugee Act was brought in. That act would have kind of not impacted India very much, but the course of events in the following decades led to that very big change. In the 1850s, the British government took over the control from the company. And in 1871, this otherwise forgotten Thugee Act was revived, because the man who was appointed as commissioner to implement that act had prepared a list of communities. His name was Sleeman. Sleeman had worked in Central India mostly, almost for 20 years. He died in 1856, just a year before the what some people call the War of Independence, some people call the revolt against the British, depending on which history they read. He had died, but when the British government took hold of the power, his list was resurrected. In that list, he had put the names of offenders in terms of their communities. And so the list was not the list of names of offenders, but it was the list of communities. In 1871, the Criminal Tribes Act of India was brought in. And it said that the following communities shall be seen now on as criminal communities, which means anybody born, an absolutely newborn infant of 1 hour, 1 day old, was also to be criminal, to be seen as criminal. They had given that list of communities included, for instance, Minas. Now, who were the Minas? Minas were the traditional coin makers. The British wanted to take over the function of making coins. Therefore, Minas had to be declared as counterfeiters. They were metallurgists in a way, traditional metallurgists. So they became counterfeiters and therefore put in the list of communities. So the first in the list is counterfeiters, but the community name is offense is counterfeiting or whatever that. Yes, but the name of the community is. The second is transgenders, the Hijras. They were also, so many communities were put in that. All these communities were forced into jails, soft jails if you like to, reformatories, with fencing, wire fencing, barbed wire fencing of 14 feet height. That was the provision, in such a way it was thick fencing so that even a cat could not jump from this side to that side. People lived in those settlements and they were put to hard labor, unpaid, no wages were paid. Most of the public works during the colonial times were carried out, executed by these people, these communities, many of them died. We have no count of how many died. None of them was paid any wages. There are some other communities which had to face imposition of area, which had to face area restriction. That is, they could move about within a taluka, within a district, but not outside. If they had to go out, they had to take a certificate, a permission from the local officer, and on coming back to report to that local officer. This law was based on the British ignorance of how Indian society works. They argued that if a Brahmin son necessarily becomes a priest, and a Baniya's son necessarily becomes a merchant, then a criminal son will necessarily become a criminal. This hereditary crime was the idea which governed their minds. This law went through several amendments. The last was, as far as I remember, 1924. And every amendment saw addition of new communities and the extension of the area to which this law applied. For instance, in 1924, there were certain communities in the south, in Madras Presidency, which were not earlier included, got included in this list. In all, about 191 communities got included in this list. The notification of criminality was withdrawn in 1952 on India gaining independence. And because the notification was withdrawn, these communities thereafter got recognized as denotified communities. They were notified, now they are denotified. They were asked to go out of the settlements. The settlement wires were cut, and after several generations, 1871 to 1952, that long time, 3, 4, 5 generations, people were out, but none of them had land. None of them had social status. And none of them had any literacy except for some very rudimentary functional literacy. They tended to stay along the walls of these settlements, and when whisked away from those places, they moved to the crossroads, normally squares, or normally tall walls, long walls. They had, therefore, because they had no livelihood, they had to get into some small time work, like selling some stuff here for a few days, then going elsewhere, or doing some labor without any specific skills. In 1952, the schedule of tribes and the schedule of castes had been drawn up. And therefore these communities had no home either in the list of STs or in the list of SCs. The only change was they were not to be called criminal tribes, they were to be called habitual. All other provisions remained almost the same, but instead of born criminal, habitual criminal was the term that came in. In every village, if they went to a village, they were hounded out. In the cities, if they are identified as belonging to one of these communities, they are mob lynched. If the police had to make preventive detentions, it was these people who were primarily picked up by the police to show the numbers, because the police promotions depended on how how efficiently they make preventive detentions. And in many cases, the police itself criminalize these people by forcing them to commit crime because it is a very profitable, I mean, some of you may not know this, almost nobody here will know this, but let me share it. To buy and resell stolen goods is an extremely profitable profession, and very respectable people in most cities engage in that profession. These people were used with the nexus between these police and such, stolen goods traders use these people, and many of them ended up in custody. In custody, police custody, many of them have died. I have myself fought cases for, with the Human Rights Commission for their compensation, or in courts or with police officers. So many died in police custody. What are the numbers of people? What is the number of people adversely affected by this this law, which created a new class in the Indian society called denotified tribes, which did not exist any time in the last 6,000-7,000 years of human existence in this country? The numbers are based on 1931 census, where the last count was made community-wise. Based on that and projected in 1990s, it was estimated to be about 7 crores. This time the census has gone on sabbatical, so we don't know what the numbers are. But it may be about 11 crores. Which are these communities? They are mostly nomadic communities. I can name many of them. I mean, I can rattle off those 190 names, but I won't look at the time. But you know Pardis, you heard of Banjaras, you heard of Sansis, you heard of Wadars, Yenaris, Yerakulas, Haki Pikis, the bird catchers, people who play, they live by animals, Madaris or Garudis as they are called in Bengal, or entertainers, the baul singers in Bengal. I mean, since I mentioned Bengal, the singers, itinerant singers, entertainers, the tamasha players in Maharashtra, the kaikadis, the rope walkers. I tell you, if from today on, when you travel on any Delhi street, look at any square and you see those children selling balloons or some stuff every day. And we all, when we absolutely cannot help, immediately pull up the glass of our cars and shut them off from our conversation. All of them are denotified. Their population about 11 crores in this country. Their crime, no crime. Absolutely no crime. The crime is that a man called Lord Mayo, who ruled India from West Bengal, Calcutta, not West Bengal, Calcutta at that time, passed this law, enacted this law, Criminal Tribes Act. There was immediately great fury against this law. People who were affected, or even those who were not affected, understood that a new category in Indian society is being created for no fault of people. The fury was such that a man from the northwest, a man called Sher Ali Afradi, who was protesting, well, he was, in his times, languages behave differently, so he was not called Andolan Jivi. But he was protesting against the British rule, company rule in India, and he was, as a result, sent off to Andaman, where the penal, the settlement had still not come up. It was before that. This was in October 71. The law was enacted. Aparadi was sent there the next month. In February next year, In February 1872, Lord Mayo had gone to Andaman to supervise, to see how this settlement was coming up. And Afradi was, Sher Ali Afradi was there. He picked up a knife, stabbed me. That's how Lord Mayo died. He was killed. I'm not defending that. I'm only presenting the fact that there was tremendous fury against this kind of creation of new class, precisely at a time when somebody like Jyotiba Phule in Maharashtra was saying, let's think of creating a casteless society. A wrong act. These people exist in India, but most of them do not have residential addresses, and therefore many of them do not have identity cards, and therefore they do not vote. They are never in any place, any single spot in India form any majority, not even in a single village. Therefore they can never get the sarpanch elected. And they are waiting in this country for the last, from 1952 till 2023, last 70 years, 80 years, 70 years, they are waiting for a day when they will get some justice. None of the courts, suo motu, have taken up their case. The National Human Rights Commission did take up once, asked Mahashweta Devi and me to file a case, and it was heard, and the NHRC gave a positive judgment asking all states to remove this Habitual Offenders Act. In most states it was done, but in many states we are told that the act is there, but we do not use it. I do not know how it appears in yesterday's, in the recent criminal justice code, whether habitual offenders figure there or not, whether that new code is going to, in any manner, at least, to some extent help the denotified tribes, or their life will continue the way it is. I mentioned of 1871 Criminal Tribes Act. I go a little, back in history to think of another category, social category being created. I mentioned at the beginning of this speech that we know how Varnas came up, we know how Jatis came up. We also know how languages came up, and how sects came up, and how religions came up. All these things which keep us different groups. Does anybody in India know at all, how tribes came up in India? Does any of our Vedas, any Upanishads, any Shastra, any Purana, anything at all explain why in India so many of us are castes and the others are tribes? And why a tribal cannot be a caste and a caste cannot be a tribe? Can you be legally at once a caste and a tribe person? No. Why has that happened? And the answer is, nobody in India knows why this has happened. I mean, isn't it after all, we have 9% tribal population in the country. 9% of 140 crores is roughly 13 crores. We just don't know. The story is as follows. It's a little sad story. It is a story indeed, but it is also what happened in the past. Legislators actually have contributed to this, and it is a great war in Europe required creation of additional naval strength for Germany. And so Germany created an official forest. A real forest is different from an official forest, as all of us know. The British retaliated and created their own forest. But the British did, and by the way, if you look up the Oxford English Dictionary, the term forest does not mean a bunch of trees. That is only one of the meanings. The meaning is forest is land. That is the meaning. Is the land controlled by the government as forest land is called forest. And it's not so just in the government parlance, it is so in general meaning of the term. I'm sorry, I mean I might be sounding a bit absurd to you, but do look up any good English dictionary to check the meanings, several meanings of the term forest. Absolute land, absolutely without a single tree is also labeled as forest officially. The British in retaliation created their forest, but they did not create it in England because England did not have so much land. But England had a place having land under its control, which was India, so they created their forest in India. This was in 1864 when various officers, forest officers from Burma, what used to be Burma, now Myanmar, I believe, were brought here. Nearly 1,500 forest officials were brought to India and they were asked to take control of some land. What land? Which land? And this was in 1860s. The land that was taken under control by this new forest department was a very peculiar situation. I'm saying the land was a peculiar situation. Don't think I'm speaking absurd language, but I literally mean so. All the defeated princes, Indian princes, had signed treaties with the British East India Company. And therefore the land controlled by those states had gone to the East India Company either for supervision or direct control or intervention or various methods of control. But supposing there are communities which do not have a state, which do not have a kingship, idea of kingship, how do the British sign a treaty with them? If there is a union and union leader, a minister can have conversation with the union leader. But if there's a mob, how will the minister have conversation with them? All such places which did not come under the state structures in India were enumerated, detailed surveys were made, and all those areas were declared as forest. With a single legislation, all of that land belonged, I mean until yesterday, see some of the tribal communities have been here for a very long time. The Nehalis in Maharashtra have been there for last 40,000 years. And those people who did in Madhya Pradesh, the cave paintings, Bhimbetka, those people have been there for nearly 30 to 40,000 years before Jesus Christ was born. Those people who had practiced their agriculture, livelihood, whatever practice, their land, one day they were told, belongs to the queen or the king, sovereign domain. So the first creation of the forest department, how will I, what is the, dislanded these people. I mean, dispossessed these people of their land. The land was not taken away. The people were not taken away. The land remained there, the people remained there. But the people were asked, just as I, as a revenue resident in a city, pay tax to the corporation or municipality or panchayat, they were asked to pay not tax, but fine. The tax they paid was called fine. Even today, the tribes are paying fines to the forest department for their right to cultivate in the land that they. All those people were listed in 1860s. Communities were listed. And those communities were listed not by their religion or their sect, or they were listed by the name of their language. And you'll notice, go anywhere in India, name of a tribe is always the name of their language. Whereas in Banaras you have Brahmin, but not a, we don't call that community the Hindis. the Hindis. I mean, that was done in the 12th century, 11th century, when Al-Burani came here. They called all speakers Hindus or something like this. But that is, the tribes were known, those communities were named as communities by the name of the language. They declared, this is my language, so that became the name of the tribe. The Bhil speak Bhili, the Gond speak Gondi, the Santal speak Santalis, Korku speak Korku. I mean, it's आप आँख बंद करके उनकी भाषा का नाम इतना ही, I mean, not just that, but after independence, when the tribes had to be defined, among 4 or 5 minimum conditions specified. One was they live in very remote places, but what is remote from Delhi is by the same standard makes Delhi remote from their place. So it is subjective. Then they are the second is they are very shy. But I am also shy. Except that, there's an ad. My sister is very shy. That's what every boyfriend of hers says or something like that. They are shy. I mean, shy is not, I mean, we don't say that others are shameless. And that would be very good. The third is, they have their language. Language is the definitive, concrete description of tribes, because all these communities were given community names going by the language names. And that happened because the Forest Act brought their land under the government control. About 15 years back, a move was made to return the land titles to the tribes. Nobody was giving land to the tribes. The titles of this land were to be returned to them. That, I believe, has not happened fully, and I hope in the next 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 15 decades, the work will be accomplished fully. Law created our tribals. All genetic tests carried out by CCMB, Hyderabad, show that as racial stocks we are the same. There's no difference between tribes and castes. All the cultural traits also actually would have allowed us to think of us and them as an extended spectrum of a cultural continent. Law has bifurcated us, and in doing so, nomads, the denotified communities are essentially nomadic communities. Vanagujjars, for instance, all those who carried on the characteristics of pastoralists or nomads from prehistoric times into agrarian world, they ended up as denotified tribes in our republic. And those who were taking care of ecology ended up, who had kept forests alive, ended up, who had not allowed kings to dominate them, but had some sense of equality, a crude sense of equality. Of course, there were a lot of injustice there. I'm not saying they were all saints. No community is made of saints. And as Durkheim said, if a community of saints comes up, at least one of them will be seen as a criminal because that saint behaves slightly differently. So, I'm not going by that. Law segregated caste and tribe in this country. Law segregated the denotified and nomadic tribes. Now I come to the question of language. Do they have languages? I said Adivasis are known by languages. Denotified tribes also have their languages. The Banjaras have Gormati as language. Gormati has 60,000 poems. Ashokji, is India's foremost poet present here. And I say with pride for the Banjaras, 60,000 lyrics are in their memory. They are called lehengis, as beautiful poems. 60,000 poems is not done overnight. It takes centuries of cultural moving. So mental sophistication. The Banjaras have Gormati as their language. The Sansis have Bhatu as their language. Now Bhatu is the language which has terms for trade which go right back to the Harappan and Mohenjo-daro times. The Wadars are absolutely fantastic geologists because they understand the structure of rocks. They deal with rocks. They have got heavy hammers, high hammers. And because of those heavy hammers, in the Thugee Act and Criminal Tribes Act, they were made a candidate because the government wanted to disarm them. But their understanding of rock structure is first rate. They have a language. I studied my secondary schooling, my 8th, 9th, 10th standard schooling was done in a school run for Wadar children. And I tell you, the language of Wadars is so powerful. So powerful. Absolutely. If you want to curse somebody or abuse somebody, there is no parallel to the Wadars. I mean, I learned all those. I don't use it. Maybe my curiosity to count the languages of the country comes from that. I don't know. Mr. Sigmund Freud will know it. They have their languages. Now, where are these languages? The languages of the Adivasis and the languages of the denotified tribes. By the way, a friend said, but why are you so worried? I mean, are we not already complicated having Hindi, English, Gujarati, Tamil, so and so? I said, I'm not worried. I don't think we're complicated because every language is a very unique worldview. The way a given language defines space and time cannot at all be defined by another language. I mean, this evening I was speaking with some friends about civilization. But did you not say that I'm working on civilizations of South America, Africa, and there isn't a word for civilization in Marathi. Sanskrit is not civilization and Sabhyata is also not civilization. What English can describe as civilization cannot be described the same way in either Marathi or Hindi. There's so many words in Marathi, Hindi which cannot be, every language cannot be reproduced in English at all. And this is not just a translation difficulty, it's the question of the worldview. The way we view our time and space together makes our worldview. And every language makes it differently. Every language is a unique worldview. The languages of the Adivasis and the nomadic tribes have their worldviews. And they understand the waves of the sea, the winds, the trees, the lights, the movement of the earth, far, far better in some cases than we do. They understand hunger and craving of various kinds far, far better than we do. They understand pain and they understand pleasure and the joy of senses far, far better than we do. Okay, you say languages go, it doesn't matter, I will concede for a moment. Of course, I must tell you how many languages are going. I mentioned some time back a word I keep forgetting. I think that word was census. Because it has become old, I don't remember it easily. Census. 1961 census had 1652 mother tongues listed. 2011 census had 1389 mother tongues listed. 1369. So 1652 minus 1369. If somebody is good in maths, please do. It's roughly 280 or something. Mother tongues have gone. 280 ways of looking at the world have disappeared within the last 50 years. And in the next 50 years, the remaining out of those 1100, another 600-700 are going. Just go. Law sets of society into new classes impacting their languages. Now, do these languages impact their livelihood? The answer is yes. The clock is not allowing me to elaborate on this, but are you sure?
Yes.
But you have to complete next decade of, I mean, I can
Great start for the next.
Say I speak the Kokna language, not Kokni of Goa, but Kokna of the Dangs district. Incidentally, the Dang district in Gujarat did not sign any treaty with the British. So, there were no princes and the Adivasis were not available, and this sovereign domain also could not be announced to them. Therefore, Dangs remained outside it is North Maharashtra, South Gujarat, and the Dangs has remained when the merger of states happened during Vallabhbhai Patel's times. Dang did not get it remains as a state by itself, a no state by itself, which is still not officially part of the Indian Republic, but informally part of Indian Republic. It's a very peculiar case. Do go there sometimes. It's a very unique case in Indian history. It's not, I mean, 370, isn't it? I think has Supreme Court discussed, and I think, is that an article of the Constitution? So if it has to be changed, the Constitution has to be amended. But it can be done by the President now. So, no, I mean, history evolves. We are moving ahead, and we must move with the current, not the electric current. The livelihood. If you cultivate in an area where for cultivation you have to pay fine to the forest department, then there is a regulation, specified regulation, which doesn't allow you tenancy status, but allows you offender status. When I buy a plot of 10 by 10 in Bombay, or 10 by 20, I can drill a hole there and draw water out of the earth. But the Adivasis are not allowed to drill holes in the earth, which means they shall not have irrigation of their own for cultivation unless the government officially gives some irrigation as irrigation to them. Why do Adivasis migrate to cities for seasonal work? Are they fond of the city malls? Actually, they don't like cities. In their hearts, they always think of, even if they're in the middle of the city, in the middle of their hearts is their Jharkhand or Chhattisgarh or Sikkim, or from wherever they came. You can ask anybody working here from those states. But if the land is not irrigated, then they can do only a single crop, which is not enough for the increased cash needs. Therefore, the law enacted some time ago, I mean long time back, is driving them to loss of livelihood. It is the same with denotified tribes. They have to produce some identification in order to access either school or health, which they don't have. And therefore their chances of getting any respectable job is zero. Besides, they're being branded as criminal. I mean, would you allow somebody inside your house as domestic helper, or what a driver, what a capacity, somebody who says, look, my ancestors were branded as criminal community, will immediately serve notice. You'll say, my Diwali ka bonus de rahe, lekin aap chale jaye. Branding, social stigma, loss of language, loss of their rights, all of these rolled together has been the fate of 9% of Indian tribals, makes it roughly 11-12 crores. Same number of denotified tribes. And I must add, all the coastal communities of India have been debarred from going into the sea, particularly deep sea. Deep sea has been sold to private companies, and the coastal communities, the fishing communities, the communities that make nets and so on, communities which work with bones and so on, which make boats and so on, have all migrated inward. The Kharwa community in Gujarat, I have seen gatherings of 5 lakh Kharwas for deciding marriages. Girls and boys were asked to stay together for a week and find their husband or wife and then go home. This used to happen. I've seen it with my eyes 40 years back. It no longer exists. The Kharwas are dispersed. They're all over the world. The community is broken. All the coastal communities of India, all the denotified and nomadic communities of India, all the Adivasi communities of India together make a number like something like 35 to 40 crores. All of them are adversely affected by law. All of them are affected in terms of their livelihood. And I heard somewhere on television, K-shaped development. Actually, we are going ahead, but one branch is going only upward and the other is going down. The economic disparity, K gives you an idea of economic disparity. We had V and so now it is the time of K economy, not Keynesian economy, worse than that. 40 crore Indians not having any chance, any possibility of a decent livelihood. Reservations, of course, you'll say reservation, does it help or not? There is no reservation for DNTs, there is no reservation for coastal communities, and even this ST reservation, go and ask any university, vice chancellor, what is the number of faculty belonging to ST community, and you'll see that they have not filled the post because they did not find competent candidates. Competence, like I know Brahmins used to say Gunavatta. I don't know the Hindi exact word, but merit. Merit is a spiritual and metaphysical word. Merit is accrued by collection of punya. It translates into merit. Law is supposed to free us, make us a society, human society, equal society. That's what Dr. Ambedkar was arguing 100 years ago when he spoke of the question of Indian rupee, and later the spirit of what he was saying in Annihilation of Caste in 1936, and later in the Constituent Assembly, the Constitution of India, which I wish it a Happy New Year. I wish the Constitution of India Happy New Year. And where is that dream in this India for these 40 crore people? Is law responsible in some way? And if it is, then is it our responsibility to do something to alleviate these people, end their suffering? As Gautam Buddha said, at least recognize there is a problem, don't solve it. But half of the solution is in recognizing that. Is this a problem for us or not? Losing so many worldviews, and at the same time, that's one deficit, cultural deficit, and at the same time dehumanizing 40 crores of our people. Nectar makes us immortal. But if we become immortal with nectar in this condition, and Hindi में मैं कैसे अमृत हमें हमेशा के लिए चिरंतन बनाते, अमृत हमें चिरंतन बनाते। लेकिन इसी स्थिति में हम चिरंतन बने तो ये अमृत काल कितने साल चलेगा? धन्यवाद।
very much, Professor Devy. I think since this is a lecture on language, I think this is perhaps an appropriate time that I say that I'm really at a loss of words to describe what we just heard. There is a lot that we have to process, and I'm glad that we've had such a large audience and a diverse audience here today. So I think without abusing my moderator's prerogative, I'll open it up for a few questions, if it's okay, Professor Devy, from the audience. And please introduce yourselves, keep your questions brief, and then we'll try and fit in as many as possible in the next 10-12 minutes. Yeah, if there's a mic that can go around, there is a mic. We could get it back there to the last room, please.
First of all, thank you for the translation team, and thank you, sir, for the amazing speech. My name is Rohit. I run an initiative called Awaz, which makes laws in regional languages. And we recently released a compendium from the Supreme Court in 5 languages. One challenge which we are facing is, and you also mentioned briefly, that how to find equivalent terms of different doctrines which are Eurocentric. So like there are a lot, we are trying to expand into making laws accessible in regional languages, but that is a challenge we are suffering from. So how to make laws for those languages, like you mentioned, that 121 languages are spoken by more than 10,000 people, right? So how to make laws accessible for those communities when there is no equivalent term? Thank you.
Normally one would think that we translate in every language, but that is no solution. Because quite frankly, those who know English in this country, those who know English well in this country, do they understand law? What do you think? It is the spirit of law which has to be conveyed to them. And the spirit of law in our country is supposed to be, fortunately, spirit of justice and equality. So that spirit has to be communicated to them. The rest the Vakil Sahab will do. But so many of them just do not get even the legal help when they are picked up. Say a DNT wandering, you and I go home at 11:30 or 1 or 1:30 after seeing a movie or going to places of which one is fond of. Nobody will stop us. But a DNT seen at past midnight is immediately taken to police custody. So the policeman needs to be taught. Therefore, let's make a list of the mother tongues of all police people and explain law in their languages. And list of mother tongues of all judges and explain law in those languages. Our law will work well. Yeah. Law is not for every citizen to imbibe each and every article of law. How many of us understand everything that Einstein has said? We won't be able to understand. But if we know that the thinking which rules us is scientific, that's enough guarantee. Therefore, the best way is, and I will repeat this in future wherever I go, thanks for that question. Let's make a list of mother tongues of all the judges, particularly lower judicial, and translate our law in their languages. And that will improve the behavior of law in our country. Thank you.
So I think that's of course a research project, and I think this ties in nicely with what some data that our crime and punishment team has collected.
Yeah, I will charge some fee as consultant.
That 58 lakh people were arrested in India for crimes under the IPC in 2021, which is a large number, but it pales in comparison to the number of people who have been detained by police in India, which is 86.6 lakh. So essentially picked up and thrown in prison. And from what you've said today, as if, of course, that data is not available because no one collects whether they belong to a denotified tribe or not as part of the National Crime Records Bureau. But if even a sample of this survey can be done, I would think that a large number would be people belonging to belonging to DNT. So I think there's quite a few research ideas for people
It's
interested
extremely
in
worthwhile. Please,
crime and punishment. We'll certainly try. Though this data might be a little hard to get. We can take a few more questions. There's one there and one here. Yeah, so we'll take a couple together and then we'll try and address them. Yes, please.
Good evening, sir. Thank you for a very wonderful lecture. My name is Nishit and I am doing a PhD from Faculty of Law, University of Delhi. And my topic is linguistic minority rights with reference to right to education. So, sir, my question is, as you have rightly said, pre-British Indian society was primarily speech-based. And post-British, after the educational reforms, it is text-based. So when we talk about mother tongue education, then how do we protect the other languages which are not being represented in school? Because those are speech-based communities. So do we standardize them? Do we write them in text form and then teach them? Or how do we teach them to the children?
We'll take one more and the lady here had a question. Yeah.
Thank you
The
for the
mic just behind.
oh, sorry. Thank you for the lecture, Professor Devy. I'm also a PhD student and I'm also looking at language, politics and education. And actually my question was very similar, but I just wanted to add to that question about the NEP 2020 and the sort of focus on mother tongue education. On paper, there is obviously an attempt to safeguard languages and minority languages, but I'm curious about your thoughts on this mother tongue education until class 5, that clause in the new policy, especially because it also there's an argument around how once that access to English is taken away, there's also you also lose access to a lot of other opportunities, professional, educational. So where do you see this this particular clause going? Is it a positive sort of a development according to you? Is it not as thought through? I just want to know your thoughts on that particular aspect.
It is an scientifically established truth that a child being taught in the language of home, at least at the primary school level, is the most desirable education for that child. So there are no two opinions on that anywhere in the world. The cognitive processes get trained in what Lacan would call from the mirror stage till about age of 8 or 9. After that, the range of vocabulary starts changing. It's 1200 words, then it gets expanded. That said, we have this strange notion that a school should have a medium. But year on year, children who come to the school bring a variety of other languages. Would it not be possible for us to ask the teachers to learn the languages of the children who come in that year for functional purposes? Now this may sound impossible, but I have carried out this experiment in a small village called Tejgarh, where we run a multilingual school, which means our teachers, children come from 8 to 10 languages. We generally know the range. Our teachers learn the languages of the children, and then in the first few months, the children feel comfortable that the teacher speaks my language. So, translation process begins afterwards, and the child also learns to speak the teacher's language. That helps the child to learn another language without inculcating any sense of inferiority about her own language. And that's where bilingualism or multilingualism enters the domain of child's learning. It is possible to do so in small towns and villages. As far as the cities are concerned, we have a different issue. And that is, our states in India, states were made as linguistic states. All of us know that. Every state has an educational policy or language policy. But in Maharashtra, Bombay has speakers of more than 350 languages. But the rest of Maharashtra does not have. Therefore, if one were to treat, if this republic learns to treat some cities as unique linguistic territories, I will not say union territories, Ladakh, all that. But Chennai, Calcutta, Bombay, Delhi, maybe another 20 odd cities, where the language policy that the state has, that city will still belong to a linguistic state. But the language policy for that city and language policy for the rest of the state could be different. I say this because of a court case where the Karnataka government made Kannada compulsory, and then the Supreme Court said, but who are you to decide which is the mother tongue of the child? And the Supreme Court gave the parents the freedom to decide which is the language that should be studied in schools. The intention of the government was good, the intention of the Supreme Court was good, the intention of parents was good. But all three had not recognized that there is a new language reality now. Therefore, though we did a linguistic state designation in the 1950s till 1965, time has come when we'll have to designate several of Indian cities as multilingual states for the purpose of language policy. For the purpose of language policy. The trouble is, however, once that is done, those states will want to be like the Roman states, separate entities. But that's for the politicians to contain.
You want to take that speech?
There is one thing. I sometimes, very beautiful dancers, laden with ornaments, here, everywhere. I wonder if they feel the burden of these ornaments. My view of Indian language situation is like that. It's wealth. Languages are great wealth, but we need to learn to dance nicely, gracefully.
Well said.
We'll have time for one last round. I think there were two hands up at the last row.
Many languages are lying slow death.
Rapid death. Some are dying slow, but many are dying rapid death.
So any law to protect them? And one more thing, denotified tribes, you said some 1,000 languages are there. Any law to protect them? And if at all speech to be considered as a language, what is the minimum? Even if one person talks, can it be considered as a language? Because recently a research was made at JNU, three people were only speakers were left, and that language got vanished. So what is the requirement for minimum to be a language?
Well, I wish I could ask that question to myself also, because this government of this nation has decided without any public announcement of that decision. It's a discrete decision for executive purpose given by Home Ministry to the census authorities, that only if a language is spoken by more than 10,000 persons is a language. If 9,999 speak a language, the Home Ministry says, and in some nations, language is the subject of Education Ministry. In our country, language is the subject of Home Ministry for certain purposes, because we are linguistic states, and of Education Ministry for certain other purposes, such as primary education, which is so Home Ministry manages our languages, and the Home Ministry has decided in this country that if any language is spoken by less than 10,000 persons, then it is non-language, with one exception, and that is a perennial exception made. You said it, I did not say it. That is, if a language is put in schedule, the 8th schedule, and if it happens that it was being spoken by less than 10,000 persons for the last 1,200 years, it is still to be considered as a language.
Take one.
Hi.
But technically, how many persons are necessary for speaking a language? Actually, the language she is speaking, she is not speaking, but what she is doing is a language. Therefore, language, even without speech, the language of love does not have speech. Language, humans, where they are humans, there are many kinds of languages.
Yeah, so thanks for the talk. There's a new category I got to know about, that Indians are so good at creating divisions that we criminalize we criminalize birth in the form of criminalize the denotified tribes. Yeah, so my question is, the language question is about diversity. Like there are so many languages and it's so diverse. But at the same time, law is supposed to create equality in society. So how do we reconcile this notion of diversity and equality, and how does law work and how does everything?
Well, it's a great question. And when asked to a former American president and also asked to Dr. Ambedkar, I refer to that book, The Question of Indian Rupee. His very first paragraph states this principle. He says, to impose equality on unequals is great injustice.
The different worldviews.
Yes. So to imagine that there can be one regulation and it can be imposed on everybody and it will do justice, it is faulty. For example, I remember, I don't know if you have seen this or not, but I remember some years back our country, like many other countries, declared that a thing called Corona has arrived. And then this what is that? Ban on movements, public. We were not allowed to go outside the houses. But many people were going back home. It was imposed on them also. I remember seeing a scene where they were being washed by sanitizers. They were being bathed in sanitizers and stopped. Their own states did not accept them. They were in most cases this denotified or tribal people who had no homes either here or along the way. Therefore, it was necessary for the state to allow them to go to their places. Now, it was a difficult time, difficult decision, but some provision had to be made. They should not have been treated as criminals. Imposing equality on unequal is a problem, and therefore sensitivity of the government is necessary. For that, deep understanding of the society is necessary, and for that ability to listen to the people is necessary. Supposing somebody only lectures as I have been doing, Meri baat, whatever, only my lecture, then that justice will become a casualty. But you have more questions, I can meet you outside and I will answer those questions.
You had problem with seems I just
No, thank you. I think we can, as we said, we can carry it on outside. I didn't see any further hands, so I think this is a good moment to wrap up this evening. There's plenty of food for thought for everybody. Personally speaking, I think that Professor Devy, I've learned a lot today. We knew about denotified tribes. It's not something that we study up. It's not part of any curriculum. And I think there is a lot of work to be done here, because if the British treated them as notified criminal tribes, then we can see the reasons for doing that in terms of wanting to disarm the population. But the sad reality is that 70 years of independent India and governments across the board have continued this practice. We don't use that word denotified. We don't use the word criminal tribes, but in essence, we may use a more polite word. And it seems to me to be a great irony that though this is not a denotified tribe, I was recently looking at the Santhal Parganas Act of 1855, where it's declared that the Santhals are uncivilized races. And at a time when we have a president belonging to a tribal community, I think it is ironic that we have this kind of provision that continues to remain on our statute books. So given that this is a audience that has a lot of law students, PhD students, lawyers, I think there is a lot that we have to reflect on, and a lot that you have given us as food for thought in this 7th Vidhi annual lecture. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Professor Ganesh Devy. Not a book on language, but thank you very much. And thank you very much for coming. Do feel free to pick up a copy of the briefing book, which is lying right outside. There's a free copy that's available for everyone to read. We want, as Aditya said, there are 25 reform ideas there for governments, and we want everyone to read it. And please do send us your feedback, so do collect it on your way out.
Please add the multilingual city idea.
The next one. That's right. And denotified tribes, these are 2 ideas. Maybe next time it will be 27. But thank you very much for coming. Good night.